All right, welcome everyone to the XojoTalk podcast. I am Paul Lefebvre, the Xojo developer evangelist. And this month we have kind of a special little fun thing. I have two guests this time. I have Bob Keeney. Welcome, Bob.
Hi, Paul. Thank you.
And I have Marc Zeedar. Welcome, Marc.
Hello.
So these guys have both been on podcasts earlier this year. And what we're going to do this time is kind of have a roundtable discussion about the new Star Wars movie, Star Wars: The Force Awakens. And which we have all seen, of course. And we're going to have a brief little chat here. We'll be spoiler-free, but we're quickly going to dive into spoilers. So if you haven't seen Star Wars: The Force Awakens, don't listen for much longer. All right, so first of all, going around the room, initial thoughts. Bob, do you like it?
Oh, loved it. It took me back to when I was 10 years old and saw the original Star Wars, A New Hope. There were so many things in this movie that paid homage to the original trilogy that it makes up for a lot of the foibles or the holes that may have been in the plot. There's lots of things that they tried to hint at because there's 30 years between the first, the trilogy and then this one. So there's a lot of history there's a lot of backstory that we have no idea about. And so if anything any minor complaint I could give about the film is that they did a whole bunch in 2 hours and 12 minutes. And so it seemed a little rushed at times, and it left me wanting more from all the major characters, especially the new ones. I mean, we know kind of what happened to the old characters, but certainly the new characters, they're fully formed adults, and we have no idea who they are and what their backstory is. So, but I love the story, and I can't wait for the second one.
Marc, what do you think?
Well, I was going to preface this a little bit. I have sort of an unusual background with the original movies that I think is I tell people it's always interesting because I grew up as a kid in West Africa. So we didn't have TV, didn't have movies. I didn't know anything about these movies. I came back to the States in high school and finished my high school in the States. And I remember I was at a church youth group, and for New Year's Day, I was probably like 16 or 17 years old. And they had all three of the original movies on videotape, and we were staying all night at the church, for New Year's Day. And they started playing the first movie, and everybody else had all seen these, so they all went to sleep. We had sleeping bags and stuff. They all went to sleep. We had a party and stuff, stay until midnight. They started the movies after midnight. I stayed up all night and watched all three movies in a row by myself in a room. The others were all sleeping. Nobody else was paying any attention. They'd all seen them and were bored to death. And I was just like, because I'd never even heard of these. I didn't know anything about them. Watched all three. And, but it was, and these were all, mid 80s. This was old movies by this point, right? So they were all on videotape. But it sort of changed the way that, partly I was half asleep. And so I had to rewatch them later because I didn't get the whole thing. But it sort of changed, my perspective of these and how I saw these. So when this one was coming out, I actually wasn't that excited. I was sort of expecting them to be, not sure if it was going to be good or not. And I was a little bit, it just kind of, changed my perspective going in. But I will say that I came away, I think it was maybe about 20, 30 minutes into the movie, I was like, I'm really enjoying this. I'm really enjoying this. It really surprised me how much I was enjoying it. And it just kind of, was taking me back to how I felt when I was a kid and seeing that. And the original movies are actually quite flawed in a lot of ways, but they also break a lot of ground in fascinating ways. Things like having robots as main characters and stuff like that. And really interesting, well done robots too, not like robots from Lost in Space or things like that are just ridiculous. But they and this one captured a lot of that same feel. It has a lot of the same flaws actually of the original ones, which I thought was fascinating. It's almost like they deliberately made some of the same kind of weird errors in logic and things just to make us be amused by those same kinds of errors and stuff. But the biggest thing for me was just how much I enjoyed it. I just came away going, wow, that was really fun. I haven't had been to a movie in quite a while that was just that much fun. It was just a lot of fun, and that's probably my biggest takeaway. I was just kind of really impressed with that. So there's some criticisms for it that I can get into later in the spoilers, but just the initial takeaway was just I was really impressed with just how much fun it was.
Right. Well, I'll give my brief take on it, and then we will cut into some spoilery discussion for people. I got to say, I was just super, super nervous about this movie. I mean, I don't get nervous about a lot of things. You know, I was telling my wife, you know, when I go to the Xojo conferences and I get to present all kinds of presentations, I'm not nervous. I was so nervous going into this movie. And I don't know what it was. I was nervous with anticipation. I was nervous it might be bad. I was very, very nervous. And I had been in spoiler-free mode for almost 2 months. I had watched the last official trailer from October, but I hadn't watched anything else from that point forward. No TV commercials, hadn't read an article, nothing. So I knew what some of the characters looked like, but I didn't know really anything about what was going to happen. So I was very nervous. It reminded me of how, you know, when I was a little kid, how excited I would get waiting for Christmas or something like that. I was just so nervous. And I saw it on IMAX 3D on Friday. And, right when it kicked in with the opening, I was hooked. And I think a friend of mine told me this, and I'm probably going to agree. He said, like, the first 5 minutes of this movie was better than all the prequels combined. And that might be a true statement. But I was floored. It's fast-paced. There's not really a break. If you got to get up and go in the bathroom in the middle, do it after you've seen it once. But I loved it. And when it ended, I was just like, I can't wait to see this again. And actually, the family and I are going to see this tomorrow. None of them have seen it yet, so I've had to not talk about it here with them. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. I cannot wait to see it again. I'm very pleased. My anxiety is now gone, so it's all good things. So
it's funny you say that because we're actually going to see it again tomorrow as well as a family. We all went on Thursday night, but we're going to go see it again tomorrow anyway. Just because we felt that there was a lot of things said, things in the background, and things that went on that you really sort of need to see again. I've already had friends that have seen it twice, and they picked up different things.
All right, this is our break. Everything from now on is going to be spoilers. But before we continue, I wanted to note that this special episode of XojoTalk is being brought to you by what else? Xojo. And in case you're new to this podcast because you just want to hear about Star Wars, you might be wondering, well, what the heck is Xojo? Well, Xojo is a programming language for Windows, OS X, Linux, iOS, Web, and Raspberry Pi. Xojo builds on languages such as Visual Basic and Java and provides the fastest and easiest way for you to create your apps that you need to use. Xojo uses safe programming patterns, strong data typing, and has modern features such as being fully object-oriented. Programming with Xojo is fast, easy, and most importantly, fun. I encourage you to check out Xojo. Xojo.com. That's XoJo.com. You can download it for free, test it out, make the apps you need. Give it a try. Thanks to Xojo for sponsoring this episode of XojoTalk. All right, we're back, and it's spoilers now. So, serious, don't listen if you haven't already seen this. All right, so to dive right in, the first thing at the beginning is there's obviously no Fox logo with the little fanfare at the beginning, which is a little bit jarring. Unlike maybe Mark and maybe Bob, I have seen the first Star Wars movie hundreds of times.
Wow.
Literally hundreds of times. I have the dialogue utterly memorized. I know everything about it. It irritates my family when I can say all the dialogue, 30 seconds before it's going to happen. And so that little fanfare at the beginning, it just wasn't there. And it just jumps, so the Lucasfilm shows up on the screen and it's silent. And still the theater erupted in applause. But then the scroll kicks on, and I don't have the scroll memorized, haven't looked it up. All I know is that first sentence that says Luke Skywalker is missing or vanished or something like that.
Yeah.
You're just like, what?
I wanted more story there. I wanted to find out what they were like. It was no explanation.
Well, it's just
he's vanished. It's like, what?
it's such a hook. It immediately draws you in. It almost draws you in too much that you forget to keep reading.
Right.
My problem was I was in the first row, so I'm like, having to go like this to read. I felt like I was at a tennis match.
Yeah, I was in a crowded theater. My favorite point was just before they play the iconic music, there's that moment of silence. It came up and then there was this little pause, and everybody in the theater, we were all kind of like holding our breath. And then somebody in my theater, it was a pretty crowded theater. I was in like fourth row, and somebody out there shouted, "Hit it!" I don't know if you'd seen the movie already. This was like the first matinee on Friday. So it was like the earliest showing I could go to. It was at noon. And somebody shouted, "Hit it!" And then almost instantly, as though he had choreographed it, that theme song came on, and everybody just started clapping. I mean, it was really a wonderful moment. I thought it was so cool.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I need to see it again so I can more carefully read and remember the opening scroll, because I don't really remember all the text in it. I haven't Googled around to see if anyone's typed it up. I'm sure someone has that have seen it multiple times at this point. But that opening line, it kind of just kicks off the whole point of the movie at that point. And you're like, all right, because the prequels generally didn't have anything in those opening scrolls that drew you in.
It was that Luke Skywalker's vanished, and the whole plot of the movie is to find him. So,
right, and it kind of draws in too, because Luke Skywalker was not in any of the trailers, and the only thing I had known is that yes, Mark Hamill supposedly is in this movie in some manner, because there were years ago pictures of him dressed as Luke Skywalker or something like that. But that's what I kind of knew, and I'm just like, what? He's vanished. But now they've given, essentially the movie is about finding Luke Skywalker, which is, that immediately just draws you and it connects it to the old movie, because he was the critical character in the old movie. And then the opening scene evokes the first Star Wars movie with the giant spaceship. I found it to be a little dark. I saw the movie on IMAX 3D. When we see it tomorrow, we're not going to see it on 3D. I think the 3D might have dimmed and made the movie a little blurrier than I like, so we'll see how that contrasts.
The version 3D, which I always hate. So
yeah, I'd rather I had not seen it in 3D, but I really like IMAX, particularly the sound in the IMAX theater, and the screen size is much bigger than most of the screens here in Maine, so I usually try to pick IMAX first. But then I really only remember one great 3D scene where there was a Star Destroyer, and it kind of was poking out at the screen, and that had a really 3D effect where it looked like the Star Destroyer was hovering over you. But other than that, nothing really jumped out at me that required 3D. Then that didn't require 3D either. But so where are we? The Star Destroyer opens up, and then I forget, because I've only seen it the one time. I forget if it starts on the planet surface or if it starts with that ship leaving the Star Destroyer.
I think it starts with that. Well, part of that crawl, it tells us that there was this daring pilot that Princess. Well, it's not Princess Leia; it's General Leia now, and she sent her most daring pilot to go to this planet, Jakku, to find some information that's going to lead him to Luke Skywalker. And then they cut to the scene in the tent with the old Jedi.
All right, so they did cut to the tent on the planet first.
Yeah, pretty quick. I can't remember. There might have been a close-up shot of the planet or something. But
and I don't know about you, Bob, but it starts off, boom. They're like in the middle of a conversation almost, and you're like, who's this dude? Seems like I should know him. I don't know him. I'm so confused.
Yeah, it definitely starts pretty quick, but they introduce you to Poe right away, who I loved as a character. And again, I totally want to know what his backstory is, because, okay, you don't become the world, the best pilot for the Alliance by being a quiet and shy dude. And, that was the other thing I was going to say earlier. This whole movie, it seems to me like it's a whole World War II vibe in the movie. Because you've got this, New Jersey accent pilot who's this, who's really good, and he's good looking, and then later on in the film you see the TIE fighters coming in out of the sun, and then you see the crowd, the stormtroopers with the supreme or with the general talking and all that. I mean, it just screamed World War II vibe to me, because the original series was more of a Western. The prequels were like, the Old Republic was equivalent to Greek and Roman times and with the Senate and all that. So this one was very much like that. And, all of a sudden, they're trying to find something. You don't know what it is originally. You're assuming, Luke Skywalker. And that's where they introduce you to BB-8, which, oh my gosh, BB-8's the cutest droid ever, I think.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. Because Mark, is that the remote control Sphero one?
Yeah, my friend got it to me for my birthday, so.
Mark's showing us the little remote control one.
I have to take the one off because my cat takes it off and runs off with it, and then I'm afraid I'm going to lose it.
Yeah, I might want to get one of those to play with the cat. But yeah, everyone has seen that robot at this point, and you're just like, oh, that is just going to be too cheesy, and it's not. BB-8 is not cheesy at all.
Wonderful.
In one iota, it is every bit as good as R2-D2 for that effects. But different. Yeah, it's not a copy of R2-D2. No. It has its own character and personality, and it just fit into the movie wonderfully.
Yeah. If anything, I would say BB-8 might be better than R2-D2 from a couple of different aspects. Maybe not as capable, but certainly better from a lot of things. He certainly, BB-8 definitely blends in much better with the action sequences. When they're running away, BB-8's keeping up with them, and you can tell he's running. And I think they actually had an actual model that was working with him, and he leaves footprints in the sand and the whole bit, and just very well done.
He's more mobile.
Yeah,
mobile. He can get around a little bit easier than R2. R2, you always had to come up with ways to bring him along. And did that a little bit with BB-8, but it's not quite as.
Yeah, well, that's a good observation, because R2. I mean, I suppose in Empire Strikes Back, he was part of the action when they were escaping from Bespin, and maybe in Return of the Jedi. But he was pretty stationary, even though he was he couldn't, because obviously he just couldn't go everywhere really easily. But BB-8 is just with them, and at one point in the movie, he kind of just shows up, and you're like, how the heck did he even get there? But
well, and there's a great scene where they're walking down the stairs, where Rey goes downstairs at the cantina scene, whatever, and you can see him kind of struggling to get down the stairs as they
rolling down, bonk, bonk. It was pretty funny. So going back to the beginning of the movie, you've got because we don't want to get too scattered all over the place, but we've met Poe, who gets this map apparently from this old guy that we don't really know but feel like we ought to know, and then all of a sudden the bad guys are landing to capture this, and there's a battle, and lots of shooting, and it's up close and personal with stormtroopers at this point. You see the troopers flying into the planet from within the ship, and you see them land, you see them run out, and you see the stormtroopers being, no other word for it, badasses. I mean, they are shooting and taking no names and just decimating the place. And then the real bad guy shows up. And that, if we get the name right here, because I had been spoiler free, I actually didn't know the names of the characters.
Right. Kylo Ren.
And yeah, so this was Kylo Ren is the big bad. So, well, not the big bad, but the bad guy for the movie essentially. And but I didn't know their names right away, so it took me a little bit into the movie before I had the character names straight. So pay attention. But yeah, so Kylo Ren comes on, and he kind of, again, a lot of this movie evokes the classic trilogy in sometimes very blatant ways, sometimes less blatant ways. And Kylo Ren certainly evokes Darth Vader. He looks almost like a shadow of Darth Vader. His voice is distorted, although in a different and scarier way than Darth Vader. And he just, he immediately shows up and starts doing bad things. I mean, in the first Star Wars, Darth Vader choked a dude and threw him and did some other stuff, and that's nothing. I mean, Kylo Ren just looks and acted a lot meaner and badder, and ends up capturing Poe. And I think at one point he stopped a laser blast with the Force or something like that.
It freezes in midair. I like that. That was cool.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly that was pretty cool. Poe, before he gets captured, stuffs this thing into the BB-8 droid and sends him on his way. Again, evoking A New Hope, putting the MacGuffin into the droid and sending him on his way for people to.
I would like to say something about the Poe character. He's the pilot, and my initial reaction was pretty much the only thing that I really didn't like about this movie is Poe's character and the actor portraying him. I could not stand him. I actually, when he first came on, something happened, and I actually toyed with the idea of walking out of the theater. That's how visceral I reacted to this. And the problems are twofold. One is, all we were told was daring pilot in that crawl. And then secondly, we get into the scene where there's this guy talking with the old guy. The old guy's obviously a Jedi. And they're talking, and the actor who is playing Poe was so bad. And not that he's a bad actor, but he's just bad in this role, and the character is badly written, I felt. I didn't even realize it took me a while to realize this was the pilot. And my first thought was, he is pretending to be part of the resistance. His acting was so bad that I was like, oh, he's pretending to be part of the resistance. He's about to betray the old man. And he's getting the information from the old man, and he's going to turn around. I think there was a clip we saw of the stormtroopers arriving or something, and so I thought, when he's going to immediately turn around and give the old man and he's going to betray him. Well, then it went a completely different direction, because it turns out this guy that I didn't like, that felt so phony, he's actually a good guy. So then, but he seemed like he was such a poorly written character. He's very undefined. We don't know. We haven't seen him do anything. All we're told is he's this daring pilot. We didn't actually see him fly or do anything. So then I thought, oh, he's a real minor character. He's going to get killed off right away, right? But then it turns out he's involved pretty much the whole movie in a lot of. It's not that many scenes, but his character is involved to spoil things. But yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot since I've seen the movie, and the problem is he never really does anything heroic. All that happens is we're told that he's heroic. Like even in the torture scenes where Kylo Ren, the Darth Vader clone that you just mentioned, is torturing him, we never actually see any torture. All we see is there's a scene of him strapped to a chair with some blood on his face, and
I think he screams,
ice cracking, and acting like he's he's been tortured, but we don't actually see him being tortured or anything, and then he escapes, and I don't know if we want to get too far into the storyline already, but he never really does anything, and I think that character throughout the whole thing. I listened to another podcast, and apparently he's a character in this. There's this whole a bunch of other stories about Star Wars that have been written. There's the games. There's all kinds of other comic books, all kinds of stuff, and he's apparently a character from those. So I've never heard of him. I know nothing about that universe, and so to me, he came across as very underwritten because we know nothing about him. He's just and just the way the character was done. All we ever see from him is just his smart aleck comments, and we never actually see him doing anything. And it just felt like, who is this guy? What's he doing here? He's out of place. He just never really fit for me. And, initially my reaction was just, this is horrible. I want out. But then, he's not that much into the movie and went on to other characters. And then it was fine. I was okay. He's minor. I won't worry about it. And then in the end, it's sort of like, it's not that big a deal. He's just one character that I didn't like, but and I liked everybody else, but that one, for some reason, just that was really my only big flaw in the movie. There's lots of little tiny flaws, but they don't really hurt anything. But that one really bothered me. But other than that,
you have a counterpoint, Bob.
Well, my counterpoint was that was certainly one of the characters that has a whole backstory, and possibly from the expanded universe that is no longer canon, blah, blah, blah. But I think that's a great example of one of the characters that should have been developed more, but because they had so much to fit into 2 hours that they just went, well, okay, we're just going to have to, you're just going to have to suspend disbelief for a while that this guy is a good pilot and he's very brave and that you're going to have to deal with it. So, valid points, Mark. We don't know anything about him. So
my problem was I just kept misinterpreting the story because I kept seeing just the way he was portrayed, I kept reading other things into it and thinking, oh, he's going to betray people. He's going to do this or that. And then none of that stuff that I kept thinking was going to happen actually happened. It went a completely different direction. And then finally, I'm like forced to admit, okay, I guess he's actually a good guy and he's one of these heroes. But he was such a cardboard character that I didn't care for him. I kept praying he was going to die. It was like, it was just kind of funny, But
well, certainly of the new characters, he's by far, has the least screen time.
Yeah.
Certainly, you know the least about him. You're not as invested in him as any of the other characters, who are all wonderful and I think very well written, and you get attached to very quickly. So yeah, I would agree. I can't say at the beginning he offended me, but I was a little confused as to who the heck he was, mostly because again, I didn't have a lot of reading about this to know who all the main characters necessarily were going in. But after the fact, it seems like he was being billed as one of the main new characters. So it does seem a little surprising how little he was in it overall.
Well, he's apparently a very famous actor. I'm not really that familiar with him. I remember the scene where he puts on the helmet and he's flying towards the end. And you only see his the lower part of his face, his mouth and everything, because that helmet covers the eyes and nose. And I thought he looks very similar to Luke Skywalker in the original movie, where he's wearing the helmet and all you see is his mouth, And I thought he was cast. My first thought was, oh, he's cast because he looks very similar to Luke Skywalker, to Mark Hamill back in the first movie. And I was like, because the mouth looks very similar. There's something about that look and so I thought, oh, he's just cast because he looks similar when he has the helmet on.
All right. Anything to add about Poe before we move on to the next new character that is introduced shortly after? So during this battle scene, you see all the stormtroopers come on, but one of the stormtroopers is acting a little odd. He seems very upset about being asked to attack this village of people and shoot people, and they certainly focus on him a bit, and then. And they kind of just leave a lingering shot on him as Poe is captured and heads back up to the Star Destroyer with Kylo Ren. And then you get back to the Star Destroyer. Poe is kind of tortured a little bit, as Mark has mentioned. And then they jump back to the Stormtrooper, who actually pulled his helmet off at this point. I don't remember. Did he pull his helmet off on the planet? He did. Okay.
No, not on the planet. Just
not on the planet.
Not on the planet, yeah, on the ship. When the ship gets back to the Star Destroyer, he takes his helmet off and he's like gasping for air. He's very upset about something.
They had blood on his helmet that he got from his friend who died in front of him on the planet.
Right.
I thought that was a neat touch because otherwise you can't tell one stormtrooper from the other because they all look.
Right, yeah, that was a good touch so you could stay focused on. Of course, you could kind of tell by his actions because he was a stormtrooper having the panic attack. But but taking the helmet off was a kind of a Star Wars first. I suppose in the Clone War movies, I guess you knew who was under the clone troopers, but I don't remember them actually taking helmets off after they were on. They did in the cartoons and stuff.
Well, and he got in trouble for taking his helmet off, so that was the other thing. It's like, that's verboten, and you're now in trouble, and he got put on report or something like that. So
yeah, they were going to send him back for some sort of reprogramming to get him to not be afraid of shooting people. But in the end, he decided, I want hell out of here, and he decides he's going to grab Poe instead of transferring him somewhere, grab him and use him to escape. And that's kind of maybe the second funny part. This movie was hilarious, really. Had lots of funny bits. Probably the first funny bit is when Poe is captured and he looks at the bad guy and says, "So I'm confused. Do I talk first? Do you talk first?" And that was kind of funny. And I think that might have been one of the first attempts at giving Poe a little bit of character. And again, saying this guy is some sort of smart-ass, super cocky pilot. And I think that worked there. And then, the stormtrooper dude grabs him and Poe also, this I think is meant to say that he's kind of smart, realizes that the stormtrooper isn't just saving him because, he's being altruistic. He's saving him because he needs someone to fly an escape ship. And Poe, being a good pilot, would be a perfect person to do that. I don't know exactly how the stormtrooper knew that Poe was a great pilot, but that's... I mean, unless he read the file when he was transferring him, but
that's right.
But so they escape. They grab a TIE fighter, get the heck off this Star Destroyer, and are heading back down to this planet, which seems like a strange way to escape because that seems like it might be kind of easy for you to get caught again. But Poe really wanted to get his BB-8 droid with the map back. So they head down, but they get shot on the way down. It's not a clean escape. It's not like, at the beginning of A New Hope where R2-D2 and C-3PO are in the pod there, and you've got the mother of all, coincidences. The Empire decides not to shoot the pod. And he's just like, that's the end of Star Wars right there. If, that pod is blown up. But so they actually shot at this thing, and it crash lands on the planet, and they're separated. The stormtrooper, who at this point is then given a name, he just had a number before, FN 1234. I don't remember exactly what the number was. And Poe says, you know what? I'm just going to call you Finn. FN Finn. So again, Poe, so Poe had a few points there, even if he's still kind of an enigma. And then the crash, all you see is Finn. And that's it. Yeah, Poe's nowhere to be seen. The presumption is he's dead, although it didn't make it really clear to me that he was dead. And did see at least one trailer where he's not dead, that wasn't too suspenseful for me. So,
yeah, Finn finds Poe's jacket, which is a big mystery of how in the world the jacket ended up there. But then the ship is there, and it gets sucked into the ground by some kind of, I don't know, it's like a worm from Dune or something that swallowed the...
Yeah, I didn't get the ship sinking either.
The body's in there, and somehow his jacket got thrown clear, and the body's inside, and he gets eaten or something, so he's dead. So I was cheering. But
right, and in between this, at some point, it must cut right after the crash to our other new character, which is Rey, the lead of the movie.
I think they intersperse her stuff before the crash.
Maybe, yeah. And Rey is a young woman who is on this desert planet, scavenger of some sort. And they kind of start her off really cool, where she's inside of a crashed Star Destroyer, ripping parts out. And that's pretty darn cool, actually.
Well, and it's interesting that the backstory for that, you can sort of feel that, okay, the Star Destroyer crashed on the planet. There's a whole industry that's developed into scavenging parts from it. It's obviously not illegal, but that's how she's making her living, because she's doing handing the parts over and getting food. And that's how she's living. And that's a really cool way of giving the backstory, because she's obviously been there a while, knows the rules, everybody knows her, nobody's giving her crap or anything like that. So she's very established in that routine. And that gives you an incredible sense of this backstory that we're missing from Poe and even Finn for that matter.
Right, yeah. She's easily the most well-developed character. I mean, there's still lots of mysteries around her as well, but we spend a lot of quiet time, relatively speaking, with her, seeing her life, which frankly looks like a really miserable kind of life. She's on this awful desert planet. I mean, other than to evoke the original Star Wars, I'm not entirely sure why they went with another desert planet that has a different name. That's weird to me. Why didn't you just keep it Tatooine? I'm sure there's some reason, but that
actually might be one of the things. I mean, there's a lot of speculation on who Rey really is. So because she experienced, and we're jumping later in the movie for a little bit here, but she shows an incredible affinity with the Force. So there's speculation that either she's another Han Solo, Princess Leia child that we don't know about, or she's a Skywalker. Well, I guess she'd be a Skywalker either way, a Skywalker child or Skywalker grandchild. But yeah, I mean, I suspect that she's one of those, and we'll find out in the next movie.
Yeah, they certainly left stuff. So we spend time with Rey, and then in the end, Finn comes across. Actually, before that, BB-8 comes across Rey, where Rey kind of rescues BB-8 from yet another scavenger, and so those two are kind of hooked up. And then a few moments later, Finn makes it to the little village where Rey is. So the three of them are all there, and at this point, the bad guys know they're looking for orange BB-8 robot. Seems to me stopping at the hardware store, getting some decals or something, changing that around might be a good idea. But they certainly, even though they appeared, they knew the Empire, or not the Empire at this point, the First Order was looking for an orange BB-8. They didn't get an outfit for him to wear or something.
And Poe did say to Finn when they were up on the Star Destroyer trying to escape, he mentioned that he had to get to the planet to find his BB-8 model droid, who was unique. He said he's orange. There's nobody else that looks like him, right? So we'd already been told that this is a unique looking. He's the only one that looks like that. But there's a little flaw there because he didn't tell him his name. He just said BB-8 model droid. And then later when they're on the planet and they start to run, Finn actually makes a mistake because he turns and says, BB-8, come on. And he doesn't know BB-8's name, and he calls him by name. So you have to watch for that when you rewatch it. It's pretty funny. But I know. Yeah,
so they kind of all meet together there. Bad guys find him at the same time, too, so there's an escape scene. And some good character moments there where, Finn at first thinks he needs to rescue Rey from the bad guys, and it turns out that, this Finn dude is the one that's going to need rescuing, as Rey is more than capable of taking care of herself, which is pretty cool to see. And they're running to a big ship to get out, and they point, and he points, what about that one? And she says, no, that's garbage. They run to the big one. The big one gets blown up. They have to take the garbage one, and the garbage one turns out being the Millennium Falcon. Theater erupts in cheers when you see that. And rightfully so. The Millennium Falcon is a huge character, really. I mean, it's a big character in Star Wars, so it's kind of cool to see that. And surprisingly, the damn thing starts right up.
It was a bit of
a dead battery.
It happened to be the Millennium Falcon on this desert planet, that.
Well, that's the beauty of the Star Wars movies. The Force is behind all these coincidences, right? So they can just write them in and say that. And
true.
Well, that would be another one of those speculations, because if Rey is really a Skywalker or a solo child, that might be why she was put on that planet, and also might be why Han Solo and Chewbacca were on that planet.
Right.
Yeah,
well, they weren't really on the planet, per se. They were near the planet? Is that how that needs to be?
Yeah, and they were supposedly looking for the Millennium Falcon. He knew it was around there. And Han Solo knew the name of the guy that Rey dealt with that buys all the crap parts and apparently owned the Millennium Falcon that had been stolen and all that. And so he, because there was a whole scene where Han Solo talks about it. It was stolen from this guy, from this guy, from this guy, and now this guy.
Yeah, there was a lot of levels of thievery there that would make interesting backstories in and of themselves, I suppose. So they jump on the Millennium Falcon, just Rey, BB-8, and Finn, and they get this thing started up and they take off, and there's a cool escape Falcon flying scene on the desert planet. So Falcon flying in atmosphere. That was pretty neat to see. Some bad flying to start with, and then some impressive flying to end with. So she's a quick study. And then they get off the planet, and it seemed to me they got away. I mean, because apparently there's a Star Destroyer around this planet at some point, but apparently they must have took off on the opposite side or something, because they didn't encounter the Star Destroyer at any point. And the first thing they do is they get sucked into another ship, and they're all worried, and they hide in the smuggling compartments, and that's when you get the first introduction of the old characters. Han Solo and Chewie show up on the screen again more. This was the same scene from the trailer where Han says, Chewie, we're home. And, the crowd in the theater, of course, goes nuts. And that's all cool. And Han Solo and Chewie in this movie were just fabulous, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, very much. It was. Yeah, I was really surprised how great Harrison Ford was. I mean, he just, even though he's older and all that, I mean, it was the same character, he's probably my favorite character from the original series too. I just loved him in the original series. And because Luke Skywalker, remember the original ones, he was kind of a little bit of a whiny wimp at times, and Han Solo was always great. He was always a grumpy kind of reluctant hero. And
yeah, well, he certainly maintains his grumpiness as he's gotten older, or maybe that's increased.
Exactly. It was wonderful.
So they all meet together on the Millennium Falcon, which is really kind of cool. And there's a little bit of conversation about some stuff. And, apparently Rey kind of recognizes them. Oh, you're Han Solo. And she says something like the famous war hero or the famous smuggler or something like that. And there's another gag here where they look at Chewie and say, well, which one is it? And Chewie just kind of shrugs his shoulders. I don't know. Which is a little more perhaps body acting than I remember Chewie doing in the past. He seems to maybe do that a few other times in this movie. But so then Han says, things are true. Luke Skywalker is true. The Force is true. And some of this is kind of funny, and this is a Star Wars issue with timing. I think they tend to make the elapsed time seem much longer than it is. I mean, because, this 30 years isn't that long. So why would people not know or have forgotten about these things? I mean, 30 years is when the last Star Wars movie came out. Everyone remembers stuff from 30 years ago.
It's a big universe. That's why people don't do it. Plus, you can assume that the First Order has been collectively erasing the history books.
Well, apparently they're quite thorough at it, which seems, I mean, apparently they don't have the internet where that wouldn't be practical. I mean, and that brings back lots of them. Even the very end of the movie where they end up having the entire map. It's like there was only one copy of a map. I don't know. This goes back to Star Wars has convenient plot devices and ignores other things. And that's okay because that's Star Wars. But, you know, you don't want to think too hard about it because your head might explode. But
well, that's what I was saying earlier about this movie makes a lot of the same, you know, I think it's intentionally makes a lot of the same kinds of mistakes that the original makes. And in a way that makes it feel more like Star Wars. Because it's like the same kind of logic flaws in the storyline fit, you know. Which
the next
part
of the,
you know,
right now it didn't bother me at all. It's more it adds to the lovable charm of Star Wars, if you will. The next part of the movie, I think, is when the pirates kind of board the spaceship that Han and Chewie have captured the Millennium Falcon on. This part of the movie, this would probably be the bathroom break part of the movie. I didn't see how it achieved anything other than getting all of them back on the Falcon.
I think that was the main purpose. I mean, you know, he's what I liked about it was this was Han Solo. You know, it's showing that he's still behaving like he did 30 years ago when he was a young spunky kid. You know, where he's involved in all these smuggling operations and betraying various people, and basically two groups of people that want money from him show up at the same time, and they're ready to kill him because he owes them money, and he's going to talk his way out of it, you know, like he always does, and I thought that was, you know, just sort of classic, you know, and then he's apparently smuggling some giant monster creatures that are like giant squid or something that are really weird, and of course they get set loose, and then all havoc reigns, so they eat all the bad guys, and Han and Solo and them escape in the Millennium Falcon, basically. So I think that was the whole purpose, was to get them off of, you know, onto that ship and back to the main story, you know.
The other thing that ends up happening is that this is the first part where we start to see Finn as having a lucky streak. So you think about all those monsters on that ship, they all got eaten right away. Instead, for him, the monsters just decide to drag him through the ship. And so I really think that Finn is the lucky Force user. You know, the Han Solo was always like that. Was always the lucky gambler, the lucky shot. So I think Finn's that replacement character.
That's an interesting observation. I like that.
Yeah, but certainly, I mean, that I felt that sequence went a little longer than needed to achieve the overall goal of just getting them back on the Falcon to where they next needed to go. It was
an action sequence that had monsters and lots of action and showed ingenuity of the new characters. I mean, it was
right.
Really...
Yeah, right. Character, you know, showed them all in, you know, tough situation, and they figured their way out. Yeah. And that's fine, I suppose. Yeah. So they escape from this, and they all jump in the Falcon, and boom, go to light speed, and they're heading off to meet this new person. But before we do that, we should probably jump back a little bit back to Kylo Ren with some of the scenes that kind of show his intensity. So I'm reminded of the scene on the Star Destroyer where he's given some bad news that essentially BB-8 has escaped, and Kylo Ren just goes apeshit and flips open his lightsaber. The guy giving him the news thinking he's about to be, you know, sushi'd, and instead Kylo Ren just starts acting like a little kid and chopping up the consoles in his room, just going nuts. It was a great tantrum. It was amazing. And then when he's all done, and when he's all done, he just like said, "Oh, anything else?"
Well, and one of the funny scenes is, you know, he's in the middle of that rant, and a couple stormtroopers go around the corner, and they see all the sparks flying, and they just turn around.
Now I can't remember on that scene. Did that happen? Did that happen before he took off his helmet and showed us a little of his human side, or was that?
I think so. I think that was before.
Yeah, I think the first time he took off his helmet, wasn't it when he was kind of had? I was going to say Padme, but Rey.
Yeah, well, there was a scene. Remember where he was like praying to Darth Vader's skull there, right? And he was.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It was really interesting because he was basically trying to live up to his idol, and his mask and everything is a Darth Vader. He's like a Darth Vader fanboy, and he apparently is and he has the Darth Vader skull there. But it was a very kind of an interesting moment because I didn't really like him not like him, but I mean, I was a little confused by him initially because he felt like, oh, this is just a Darth Vader clone when we first meet him. And I felt kind of weird because I was like, why is he in this mask? And, but once we realize he's basically a Darth Vader fanboy, it makes more sense because, especially by the time we get to that scene where he actually takes off his helmet, he's like a 12-year-old boy. It's very clear that he's not Darth Vader. He's a young kid. He doesn't need this mask. He doesn't have, Darth Vader had to have it, for medical reasons, but this guy's just doing it to look more like Darth Vader. And
he's doing it also to just be more to, make people fear him. Right. I mean, without his helmet on, he doesn't look like a 12-year-old boy, but I mean, he looks like a kid. And I mean, I don't know how old he would be. I would guess early 20s or something. But I mean, he's got one thing. I mean, he's got the best hair I've ever seen. I would kill for his hair. But I mean, he takes it off and he's got this flowing mane and he's a very handsome, young looking dude. And you're not going to be thinking, evil Sith bad guy kind of thing. But when he's got that mask on with the distorted voice, and he's just 100 times scarier, and he's doing that on purpose to intimidate those around him.
I really like the way they did the voice too. I should mention, because when he had the helmet on, it was distorted. It sounded a little bit like Darth Vader, but it was different. It wasn't exactly like Darth Vader. So it was just a little bit distorted. But then when he takes it off, he still had a very deep voice that I liked. I mean, he was still even though his face looked youthful, like a little kid. When he talked, his voice was very mature, and he has a very deep voice, and it sounded Darth Vader-ish, even without the mask on. And I thought that was a really good touch, because if he had like a high squeaky mouse voice or something, it would have been like, what?
See, this is where I'll disagree, because I hated Adam Driver as this character. With the mask on, I thought he was fine, but I don't think he looks like Han or Leia. Yeah, it's supposed to be their child, and didn't look like it. His voice was weird. I don't know if they tried to do some distortion of his normal voice, even with the mask off or not. But one of the few characters that I really disliked coming out of the movie, and not disliking from a character standpoint, but from an actor standpoint.
From a casting standpoint.
Yeah, it just didn't.
Well, I definitely liked his distorted voice. I thought it was creepy enough to be effective for me. As far as his looks, I mean, it wasn't immediately revealed, I don't think, that he was Han and Leia's son. No, so the fact that they didn't look completely similar maybe was because of that. But, that didn't bother me, that maybe he didn't look exactly like them. I found it was believable, I guess. I mean, I thought I didn't know the guy. Apparently, he's also been in some other shows, so some people recognized him, but I'd never seen him before in my life. So I didn't have any preconceived notions about him, but I thought it was effective. And I just like the contrast of the mask on and the mask off. And I just thought that was a great contrast between, and showing how, at this point, undisciplined, on how unstable he is. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was good. So going back to their escape, the Falcon crew is heading to this not really well-explained place with this alien character they're going to talk to, because the alien character knows how to get in touch with the Resistance, or get the robot to Resistance. And they land this place, and it ends up being kind of to evoke the cantina scene from the original Star Wars. It's like a gigantic cantina on a planet, I guess. I don't know. It was a lot of mysteries were around there, and you meet a new character who appears to be an all CG character, little short woman.
Yeah, the name is officially Maz Kanata.
All right, thank you for looking that up, Bob, because I didn't remember. And there's some good talking there, and this is where some more stuff gets revealed. You first thing that's revealed is that Finn appears to be just scared out of his mind and just wants to get the hell out of Dodge, and he's looking to just, get away from all this. He doesn't want anything to do with it. That upsets Rey. And then Rey, after seeing him look like he's leaving, starts to have these visions, which this is the thing I need to pay very close attention to in second viewing, because there is a bazillion things that are popping up here that you're just like, whoa, I missed that. Pause.
I'm thinking in the DVD version, we'll all be going frame by frame to see all the things that we missed.
Yeah, so she's like having flashbacks, flash forwards, seeing stuff. And this is all when she, I guess, finds a lightsaber in a box, which we're then told is, and this is a weird thing too, we're told is Anakin's lightsaber, which would mean, you got to trace the lineage. This would mean it's the lightsaber that Anakin had at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and that Obi-Wan kept and then gave to Luke in A New Hope. And then Luke lost when Darth Vader cut off his arm in Empire Strikes Back. So that would be this lightsaber that apparently you would think is sitting in a dumpster on Bespin somewhere. And it's still attached to a hand. So somehow 30 years later, this ends up in the basement of this Maz person's cantina. And so lots of coincidences there. But when Rey touches this thing, she gets all these visions. Lots of things popping up. And she kind of freaks out a bit and really doesn't want anything to do with this. As Maz starts to give her some words of wisdom, I forget what the words were, but essentially look to the future, not the past kind of thing, and take the lightsaber. And Rey's like, no, I don't want that thing. No way. And she kind of runs off, I guess. And somehow that lightsaber ends up with Finn. I don't remember exactly how that happened, but... things to pay attention to on the second viewing, because there's a lot of stuff happening.
The weapon, and somebody handed him. They said, "You've got one," and he's like, "Oh yeah." He's holding the lights.
And of course, the bad guys are never far behind chasing BB-8 because in the cantina, someone there spotted this unique-looking BB-8 droid that they made no attempt to conceal and reported back to the bad guy. You could have left him on the Falcon.
Yeah,
he wasn't serving any purpose inside the cantina. Yeah. So the bad guys show up and do bad things, start shooting, blowing up things, and there's chaos and mayhem. And then Rey gets captured, if I remember correctly. And also the Han, Chewie, and Finn also look like they're just about captured after, maybe thinking they might have been able to fight their way out. And then they're walking with their hands up, and all of a sudden you see off in the distance what look like some X-fighters flying over the lake towards this building, this cantina building where they all are. And they're led by Poe. Which, going back to what you said at the beginning, Mark, is you're like, because this is the one trailer I had seen, I knew this scene was coming up, but I had a why? How? Because they completely do not explain how he got from the desert planet back to the Resistance and how the Resistance even knew to come here to help out.
Well, no, they knew that part because there was the First Order people that were in the cantina, and there were also Alliance people in the cantina, and they showed two different people making comments. We need to report back. We found the droid.
All right, thank you, Bob. You're right. I do remember that now. So two different people reported back to their appropriate factions to say, hey, the droid is here. So everyone converged there. But it still doesn't explain how Poe
right, they don't do that.
Got off the...
A little bit later they explain it, but a little bit. But
yeah, not even, really. Just to say, I got off the planet, I guess.
Right. Yeah,
I took a bus.
From the plane, or from the TIE fighter. Okay.
It still doesn't say how he got off the planet. I mean, he didn't have an X-wing at that point. I mean, it didn't seem like that planet was well connected to the intergalactic subway system.
This is not the story plot you're looking for.
Exactly.
Well, they couldn't get in contact with Resistance very easily. So how come Poe was able to and get all of his friends?
Right. Well, as Bob said, we're not going to dwell on this because it won't lead to a place of happiness. But so anyway, Poe's alive, yay! And he's starting to show that he is an ace pilot and blowing things up and flying his X-wing fighter. As a brief aside, I thought it was a little strange that essentially the X-wing is the only Alliance spaceship they really are showing here. They didn't have any. I mean, in all the other Star Wars movies, there's usually multiple types, but they just focused on this fancy new X-wing version. So he helps prevent Han and Chewie from being captured, and I'm a little fuzzy at this point, so someone else needs to take over the recount.
So at that point, the Alliance folks go back to their place. Rey gets taken to the new giant planet-sized Death Star, and she gets tortured as well. And this is where we see Kylo Ren taking off his mask and trying to do the Force mind meld thing, which I didn't know you could do in this universe.
That's what J.J. Abrams was mixing things up a little, doing the Force memory pull. It's not a mind meld because he never touched anybody. He did a Force.
Yeah, exactly. So and this is where we get kind of the indication that Rey is strong in the Force because she can resist all this.
Right, and that was with a lot of Rey. I mean, Rey was a wonderful character, but certainly she kind of flipped on a dime with a lot of this Force stuff.
Yeah, which kind of leads me to believe that she may have had a little training as a youngster.
Well, it certainly seems suspect because she's getting probed by Kylo Ren, and and all of a sudden she's just like grimaces, and then boom, she's like reversing it on him and reading his mind, and which is just doubly weird because reading minds. I don't remember being a Force Star Wars kind of thing in the other movies. And all of a sudden, boom, in the span of a minute, 2 characters are doing it.
Well, but Darth Vader did do it a little bit in Return of the Jedi, because he's like, oh, your sister, so he did pull that from Luke's mind. So it is possible. We do have some precedents for it.
Maybe. That was maybe different circumstance. Certainly if Darth Vader could do that easily, he might have done that in The New Hope to find out where the Alliance base was. But again, Leia, maybe Force sensitive, was resistant to that. All right, we're not going to go there. But
I did the way that the Ren character was both competent and incompetent at the same time. That really pleased me because she was very confident, and she I can fly this Millennium Falcon, I can do this and that, but then she didn't necessarily do it that well, and
But she was more of a quick study. She
she
sucked at it right away, and then quickly became an expert in it, much like her Force usage.
And that's the way she did with the Force and the lightsaber and all the different things that she did. But I like the way they did that because it if she had just been a master off the bat, it would have been really phony. And if she didn't take advantage of these tools, she wouldn't be very heroic. So. Having her know stuff but not be expert in it, I thought was a really nice balance. Obviously, with all this, you're taking everything with a big grain of salt, but swallowing some disbelief. But at the same time, I really liked her character the way they did that because it was a nice blend, I thought. And
they certainly did well by choosing her character. She did a great job. Throughout the movie, so I'm looking forward to hearing more of her story in the next movie because I think we're going to see a lot of her and a lot of Luke.
I loved both her and Finn. I thought they were top notch.
Yeah, they were great together too. They played off each other really well. And the other thing that was cool with the Finn character is just not the Rey character, and I did find the names are needlessly similar to. Continue to confuse me. All short, 1-syllable words, 2 of which, Ren and Rey, that have the same beginning sound. They're not internalized for me yet, so I keep mixing them up. But she never, they essentially head back. Han, Chewie, Finn head back to this Death Star killer or the Star Killer giant planetoid thing to rescue Rey. But as they continue to show over and over, Rey doesn't need rescuing. And she doesn't. She gets out of her predicament by, in a very funny scene, convincing the stormtrooper who's on guard in the room with her, using the mind trick to get him to unlock her and then finally drop his weapon.
Did you recognize the voice of that stormtrooper?
007.
Yes, it was Daniel Craig. I didn't recognize it when I was watching. I didn't know that, but I read some spoilers later, and that was Daniel Craig that played that.
Yeah, I read it after as well. I didn't recognize it.
Yeah, I'll have to watch for that when I see it again and see that.
I don't know that I would pick up his voice necessarily, though. But
I'm usually better at voices than faces for some reason, but I didn't catch that one. But that was a cool.
But that she escapes. She gets out because of essentially she uses the Force to escape. She by turning the tables on Kylo Ren and telling him some of his memories, he kind of again flips out and leaves, I guess. And then she gets away from the stormtrooper and she's doing her own thing to essentially bust out of where she was.
You did leave out the part about just before that they go rescue her. There was a whole scene where they all meet, Han Solo and all the good guys meet back at the Rebel base, the Resistance base, and that's where we first meet General Leia character.
That's right.
That's important to bring that up just because.
Sure.
Right, yeah, General Leia does show up. She doesn't have a lot of screen time. They kind of keep it focused. She's very reserved. She did a good job looking like some sort of war-weary general who was just kind of beaten down, tired of all this crap, and just frustrated. And there was a funny scene in there where, for some inexplicable reason, she continues to keep C-3PO with her. And I think this is a scene where you see Leia for the first time and Han standing there, and it's this big moment, and then C-3PO just kind of cuts in front of them and says, "Hey, it's me, C-3PO. You might not recognize me because my arm is red." And you're just like, what? Some people are saying that's their favorite line from the movie. That wouldn't be my favorite line, but I found it more weird than anything. But so yeah, that's when they meet, and then that's when they hatch up the plan to come back. And there's some good quips in there with Han saying, "There's got to be a way to blow it up. There's always a way to blow these things up." and it is kind of funny that not really funny, but and probably intentional that they for the third time use a giant spheroid weapon. The bad guys have a giant planet weapon that the good guys need to essentially take down. So apparently that's a Star Wars thing. They should have put that in the prequels, I guess. So, but
actually, it wasn't a prequel.
Well, yeah, they showed the Death Star in the prequel, but they didn't have it as something they had to take down necessarily in the prequel.
Right, but they showed it, so there was some continuity there.
So the entire takedown of the space station, though, was kind of a background thing compared to the stuff that was happening in the foreground, which was them battling. There was some, spaceships flying around and whatnot. But this planet weapon sucks energy from a star to shoot at other planets. Don't think too hard about any of this. And but it does lead to the most excellent battle in the forest between Kylo Ren and what starts off with Finn, who is apparently still carrying around this lightsaber, and ends up having a lightsaber battle with Kylo Ren. Well, actually, I skipped probably the most important part of the movie, didn't I? Where they're just about to blow up the space station, and Han Solo sees Kylo Ren and confronts him. And of course, at this point, we're well aware that Kylo Ren is Han Solo's son. Although the characters of Rey is not aware of this at this point, I don't think. And so they're confronted on a bridge, and long and short of it is, after making, they tried to make it a little ambiguous as to whether Kylo Ren was going to be convinced by Han to, stop being bad. I don't particularly. I mean, they tried to do that. I don't think that was really something people were like, "Oh, he's going to be good." But then he essentially looks like he's handing over his lightsaber to Han, and instead, just kind of spears him and kills Han Solo. I mean, that's pretty much, you do that, you're bad. There's no turning around for you at that point. So I don't think we can expect in any subsequent movies the redemption of Kylo Ren, because you don't get redeemed from killing Han Solo. That's just, you can't go there. So,
I did like the scene. If you before that happened, there was two scenes that were important. One was the conversation that Han Solo had with Leia, where she pretty much told him, get our son back or don't come back, kind of thing. And so he, and there's a scene there where he's ready to leave. He's escaping, and he looks and he sees Kylo Ren walking across that gangplank, which is similar from one of the previous movies. And he starts to turn, like, I'm going to go ahead and leave. And then he pauses and he turns and he hesitates, and then he goes and talks to, and as soon as he did that, I was like, oh, he's dead. Because it was that hesitation that's sort of like, he's got that choice to make. Do I go confront my son who's turned evil, or do I escape? And he decides he's going to confront him. And of course, it wasn't a surprise to me that he got killed at that point, because I knew that was the decision. That was the whole point of that scene, was he was making that decision, that it's worth it to try to confront his son, even though he knows he's going to get killed.
Yeah, and I think from an actor standpoint, Harrison Ford's pretty old at this point. I'm not sure he'd make it through another 3 years of principal filming. So I think he may have just, I'm done. Just find a way to kill my character and make it good.
Well, I haven't read, but I'm certain that was a condition for him to even do this. Was like, I'll do this movie, but you're killing me.
Right. Well, and this is a good, the way they did this film. I really liked the way, I didn't watch any of the spoilers. I didn't even know. I think I'd heard something that some of the original characters weren't in, but I just assumed that they were like a cameo kind of thing. I was not expecting them to have the size roles that they had. But my feeling was, when I heard that some of them were going to be in it, was sort of like, oh, it's kind of, it's kind of neat in a way, but it's kind of a retread thing. And the only way this is going to work for a whole new generation of movies is to have new characters and that are just as good, in a different way as the originals. And I thought that the blend that they had in this was really well done. We got a taste of the original characters. We got, really strong new characters that we're excited to see in the sequels. And the new movies, we don't necessarily need these original characters in them. They could have small roles, perhaps. Obviously, Luke is going to have a bigger role, but I thought that blend that they did was really nice, because the fans of the original still get to have some of that, and then the newer kids that don't know the originals that well, and they have something new to latch onto, and the series has got a lot of momentum. Rey and Finn and these new characters are young. We can go with them for a long time, and that's wonderful. So I really like that balance that they did.
Yeah, I thought that was great as well. Now, going back to where I was originally, let's see here. The Force battle, which I just love so much, is that you get a lightsaber battle between Finn and Kylo Ren, and Finn, not being, as we know at this point, a Force dude using a lightsaber. That's a new thing, and I mean, he did pretty well till he got beat, and then again, maybe like Bob keeps saying, he's a lucky dude, but then this is where essentially the Force Awakens. Rey, who had been knocked out before, manages to use the Force to steal the lightsaber, the lightsaber Finn had been using, and uses the Force to kind of float it through the air. But they kind of trick you by thinking Kylo Ren is getting it. And then Rey, they kind of almost both get it at the same time, but Rey wins.
Yeah, it's coming towards him, and then it flies right by him. He's like,
it
flies
cool
right
camera.
by him and goes to Rey, and he's like, what?
It was a cool camera thing, and she ends up with it, and then she starts battling, and it looks like she's going to get beat, and then all of a sudden she does this meditation thing where she just kind of like closes her eyes almost, and then boom, she's like super Force Jedi woman almost. And that, I know readings a little bit about this after the fact. Some people are annoyed by this and that, how the heck can that happen? And I think what a lot of what Bob has said is that that's probably maybe a good portion of what the other movies are going to explain. Because it's not like, this is out of the blue. So there's something important there that will tie this all together. But right now it is a little puzzling to see how can she kind of pull it all together that quickly. But I thought it was really well done. It was a great battle. The lighting, the battling. At this point, Kylo Ren is wounded because Chewbacca had shot him after he had greased Han. And so he was wounded and he kept pounding on his side, which I thought was weird during the battle. Like, why the hell is he punching himself?
Anger for the pain.
And I had to read about that afterwards. I'm not a big pain guy myself, so apparently he was punching himself to make more pain to essentially think that would make him stronger. But apparently that didn't quite work. And then that's probably why, the combination of Finn and Rey were able to defeat him is because he was apparently significantly wounded. So that was good. So the battle ends and nobody's dead. Kylo Ren is still alive, which is kind of cool because, it always worries you when you think back to the Phantom Menace where they had the cool bad guy and they killed him at the end.
We should mention that Kylo Ren, I think it's important. There was a little bit of backstory we left out that is important, where he apparently was a Jedi in training under Luke Skywalker, and he apparently killed all the other Jedis, and that's when Luke Skywalker vanished. He went, he apparently felt guilt or something and went off on his own. But what I got out of that was that Kylo Ren is not fully trained as a Jedi. He's basically half trained. And I think
right, and I think they did a good job of explaining that.
Yeah, to me, that was part of the reason why he's young. He's half trained. He has some of the Force stuff, but he's not like Darth Vader. He's not like this guy who's
he's not in control
right,
in any way.
Exactly.
He's kind of a loose cannon, so to speak. And so that was all one. And one thing we haven't mentioned at all is the kind of the bad guy behind the scenes who has the really weird name of Snoke.
Supreme Leader Snoke.
Yeah, it's Snoke.
It's a strange bad name, I think. And it's shown in what appears to be a hologram of some sort. Not much known about any of that at this point.
CG.
And so interesting to see how that goes. But so unlike in the other movies, perhaps, where this might have been the end of the movie. This isn't the end.
Okay, we have to kind of finish up this scene. So while they're doing the whole forest fight scene, all the X-wing fighters are attacking the planet, and then they're almost destroyed and all that, and they finally the charges go off internally, so they're allowed to fly in. They hit it, blah blah blah. So one of the things that really annoyed me about this thing, it's like, did they learn nothing from the first two Death Stars? It's like they've already shown in over 30 years that X-wing fighters can avoid all these defenses that these big Death Stars have. It's like, and they go, send out a couple squads. Really? Send the entire fleet out, damn it.
Well, Bob, they lost apparently all that history, so they're not able to read it and study from it.
It's all legend and forgotten.
Fair enough, but it just seems like, okay, all right. So nobody studied the military defeat of the Death Stars.
It all blew up. They lost all that knowledge. They don't know how.
Yeah, all the paperwork
blew up and
gone.
Yeah.
No, I agree, and some of that is almost silly, but on the other hand, it's meant to evoke a lot of the feelings from these older things and to make you feel comfortable with the new movie because it's tied to the things you liked about the original movie. So it's a little manipulative there, I suppose, but it was effective. I think they did a good job in not making this, to me, be the primary focus, though. That was all kind of happening in the background.
Yeah, agreed.
And you should also mention, too, that fight with where Ren and Kylo, or Rey and Kylo Ren, they're very confusing characters.
See, I told you.
There's like an earthquake or something, part of the Death Star blowing up or something, that it separates and there's
that's how the
there.
lightsaber battle ends, because the planet is imploding, I guess, because of the attack on it, and so there's fissures opening up, and they end up getting separated, and Rey gets rescued by Chewbacca. Chewbacca managed to get back to the Falcon and picked her up, essentially, and they get off the planet. Planet weapon thing explodes. I think I read after the fact that some people said it explodes, but it like turned into a star on its own or something like that. I didn't quite notice that myself.
It had sun energy in it, right?
Well, they took the entire energy from a star, so all that energy would go somewhere. So yeah, if it turned into a star by itself, sure, I could go there. Why not?
I can certainly go there. I didn't notice that happened.
I didn't notice that either.
So I'll have to pay attention.
But the main thing is the good guys escaped and the bad guys escaped. So
right,
that's it.
There was
the next movie, because Kylo Ren's still alive, and
then they get back to the Alliance Resistance base. We'll get these terms right. And they get back to the Resistance base, and there's a little scene there where Leia and Rey kind of hug. And I know some people were complaining that it should have been Chewie and Leia that were hugging. I don't know. It certainly just worked for me. And I think, like Bob says, it maybe is indicating that there's a tighter bond there in some manner that might be explained in a subsequent movie. They certainly got
I think it's no coincidence that we're getting confused with Ren and Rey.
I would agree that can't be a coincidence. But
yeah.
So so we'll maybe have some guesses at the end. So, but the final part of the movie is essentially that they get back to the base, and then R2-D2, which that was briefly shown as being in some sort of hibernation mode earlier and unable to awaken, all of a sudden wakes up. And it's not entirely clear what caused him to wake up, and there's several options that it could be, but I don't think it's 100% clear.
I saw an article where J.J. Abrams says that BB-8 rolls up, says that, hey, I know who you are, and that's enough to wake him up, and of course they find the map at that point.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Seems a little weird, but other theories were that Luke remotely woke him up, or that he had some other indicator that would allow him to wake up. But anyway, he wakes up, and apparently the only entire map of the galaxy is sitting inside R2-D2.
Well, and so, map that leads them to where in the galaxy Luke is hiding. So,
what they showed was that R2 projects this map that has a hole in the middle,
right?
And then BB-8 has the whole part in the middle. And I don't know if I got a map and the only part of the map I'm missing is the section in the middle, I might think, oh, he might be in that section in the middle.
But they couldn't get R2-D2's portion either, though, because he was.
Well, that would imply they had no map. They must have had some map. Certainly the mapping of the Star Wars. Yeah, the mapping of the Star Wars galaxy. They need to get in touch with DeLorme or something, because it seems a little off.
There are no.
But anyway,
in this movie.
They end up with a big map that tells them exactly where Luke was. And at first, I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if that's like he's on Dagobah or something. That would be interesting. Because that's why they couldn't track it. Because, supposedly in Empire, Dagobah was a planet that, was kind of hidden by the Force, or hidden from the Force. So that's why no one knew where it was. So I was like, oh, maybe they'll do another tie-in there. But they didn't go there. They went to some completely different watery planet.
This is supposedly the first temple of the Jedi.
That is mentioned once. So supposedly the first temple. They don't go into any of this at all. And at this point throughout the movie, the only other maybe snippet you've seen of Luke Skywalker is in the flashback of Rey, where it looks like Luke puts his hand on R2, maybe to switch him off or something like that. But his robot hand is put on R2. And it's a scene they showed in the trailer as well. Mm-hmm. And at this point, there's this rather long, drawn-out, almost Lord of the Rings type end sequence. Where the Falcon arrives on this planet and it's big sweeping over the top vista, and it lands, and then Rey hikes up this stairway to.
The ship didn't just drop her off at the top of the mountain. It lands at the bottom, and she has to hike all the way to the top. It's like 20-minute hike or whatever it is.
And she's got to hike to the top, and they draw it out with her hiking to the top. and then she gets to the top, and there's this dude with a hood on, and he turns around, and it's Luke Skywalker, no doubt about it, kind of thing. Turns around, doesn't say a thing, just kind of stares at her, and that's a lot of staring going on there. And then she holds out the lightsaber, and he's just staring, and she's staring, and then they're staring. And there's a lot of staring. Seemed to go on for a long time. And then they pull back to I've been reading now. I'm not a movie guy, but it's apparently called a helicopter shot. They pull back because it's a shot from above, really high, and that's the end. Cut to black. Star Wars theme starts playing, and at this point, this probably felt more drawn out to me because at this point, I really had to run to the bathroom.
And it's over 2-hour movie, and there's like a lot of trailers before it too. So,
and I had to wait in line a long time. So, but and then it cuts, and then the music starts, and I actually didn't get to sit through the entire credits like I normally might. So, and then people were buzzing. Everyone seemed very pleased. It wasn't because I waited in line. I did the midnight thing for Phantom Menace. And I remember, I denied it for a while, but I remember I was bored in that first showing, particularly at the beginning. You're like, but this is the first Star Wars movie in a really long time, and nothing is happening. And there were points in the movie where nothing was happening. And there were some great action scenes in The Phantom Menace I still enjoy watching. They're by and large meaningless. But they're kind of, you could almost just cut them into their own little 15-minute mini things to just watch when you want something loud to test your surround sound system. But so those things made you, when you left Phantom Menace, go like, oh, yeah, that part was good, that part was good. But as a whole, the movie wasn't good. And this part of the movie, I think you can say, as a whole, the movie was good. And there were parts in it that were weird. But as you mentioned at the beginning, Mark, Star Wars has always had parts that just made no sense, really. That's not necessarily the point.
Exactly.
But and the credits kicked in, and the one thing that I did think about as I was leaving the movie theater, because when I did that, I got back to my truck and I immediately went to Apple Music and then brought up the Force Awakens soundtrack, which had come out earlier on Friday, which I didn't look at all because I didn't want any of the soundtrack titles to spoil the movie for me, because that happened with The Phantom Menace, where there was a title in there called Qui-Gon Dies. And like, dudes, who puts this stuff together? So I didn't, and granted, things are in better hands now, but, I didn't even want to chance it, so I didn't look at it. So I played that, but it occurred to me as I started playing that none of the music in this movie stuck with me. Other than the obvious stuff that's, the music that you already know. The music that the opening theme and some of the Force themes and Luke's theme and stuff like that. But there was no new music in this that stuck with me, unlike, I would say, every other Star Wars movie. I mean, even The Phantom Menace had some really awesome music in it. The music in the lightsaber battle at the end, amazing. And this didn't have great music, so that was probably a big difference for me. I've listened to the soundtrack a few times since then, and I can continue to say that the soundtrack is not really great.
Interesting. I know that a couple people have taken hints from what snippets of music played during what parts of certain scenes, and they've gleaned information out of that. I forget off the top of my head what it is, but there's one scene that where Rey is holding and fighting with the lightsaber, that it's actually doing some of the music or some of the theme from I think it's one of the first trilogy or the second trilogy, or episode 1, 2, and 3, where that indicates something, and they were positing all this stuff just based on the music that was going on during that scene and flashbacks and all that. So, there was nothing that stuck out for me from the music either. And now that I think about it, the music was probably the most disappointing part of the movie. I mean, it was big, it was expressive, but I didn't go out there and I didn't leave humming or whistling any of the songs that were in there.
Well, there was just nothing. None of the new music was distinctive. I mean, even the music. I mean, Attack of the Clones, which is not a good movie at all, had some music in there that you might remember. I mean, there was some theme music for Padme, I think, or the love music between Anakin and Padme. The music was way better than any of the scenes, but but there was nothing in the only new piece of music on the soundtrack is something called Rey's theme, which is decent enough, I suppose, but it's not a grabbing piece of music, and none of the other music to me is sticks with you. So interesting. There are little snippets of the little themes mixed into certain things. I think like when Rey grabs a lightsaber at one point, you hear what it's a little tricky because I think the Force theme and Luke's theme probably sound pretty similar.
Probably.
So it's a little tricky. Like, oh, that was Luke's theme, so that means she's related. Oh no, that was just a Force theme. Doesn't mean anything. I'm not advanced enough to pick out the details, but so that probably. I mean, I really like the movie, and since I saw it on Friday, I've been itching to go back and see it. So I can't wait till tomorrow to see it with the rest of the family who hasn't seen it yet, and see their expressions and talk to them about it. As far as predicting the future, I mean, they left lots of things unanswered, and I think lots of possible ways they could answer them. So but the best thing for me is the movie is not that far away. It's only a year and a half away.
18 months. So. And it's directed by Rian Johnson, who's the guy who did Looper and Brick and some other movies. And he's a quirky kind of director. So I've been hearing that, I don't know anything, and no spoilers, but I mean, it's just sort of, we don't know what he's going to do, but I think it's going to be, this movie had a lot of going back to the old, the plot had a lot of similarities to Death Star and all this kind of, so I'm really hoping the next movie kind of breaks some new ground and goes some different directions. And it sounds like we might get some of that with this unusual director. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think for me, this was the bridge movie between the old Star Wars and whatever this new Star Wars is going to be. Because between episodes 4, 5, and 6, and 1, 2, and 3, obviously we had Anakin Skywalker that was the constant all the way through them. So now, they're passing the torch. And this is a lot like how Star Trek did their transition from old generation to the next generation with the movies, where they had to come up with this weird bridge where you could have a couple of characters that were in the old one and the new one at the same time.
Fox shows up and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think unfortunately the story that we're supposed to be hearing really isn't going to happen until episode 8, because my guess, well, obviously Harrison Ford's no longer in there. Mark Hamill is scheduled to be a big part of it. I don't suspect Carrie Fisher is going to be a big role, because she'll probably have a cameo and probably do some things in it, but I think it's mostly going to be the new characters.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I would agree that this is certainly the bridge movie. It's intentionally meant to strongly evoke your other Star Wars movies, mostly A New Hope. And that was just very intentional to just, bring back that nostalgia, get people excited about Star Wars again. There's not long gaps anymore. Next Christmas is a Rogue One Star Wars movie that's coming out that apparently takes place before A New Hope, if I understand some of the plotting I've read. I believe it's about the stealing of the Death Star plans that leads to A New Hope.
Oh, that could be cool.
So that's another set of, you would think, largely new characters. So it'd be interesting to see how they handle that, though, because if they want to at the end hand them off to a Princess Leia, how do they go about doing that? But that's only a year away, and then just 6 months after that is Episode 8. So a very quick turnaround compared to the past, and then they're going to continue to be pumping out new Star Wars movies yearly, from what I'm hearing.
Well, didn't Disney spend $6 billion getting the rights? $4 billion. But still, okay. So they'll make over $1 billion on this movie. Lord only knows how much they spent making it. So they're going to try real hard to make their money back.
Yeah, they might make their money back on this movie alone. Right now, worldwide is up to $600 million as of today, which is Tuesday the 22nd.
So it's been a week, not even a week.
Not even a week, just a few days. Yeah, they
make more money on all the licensing deals, and this BB-8 little robot that I have and all that kind of stuff. They're making money on all that, so that's where they really make them. They'll make several billion on just all the merchandising.
Yeah, I would think this movie alone will pay for the purchase of Lucasfilm, and then everything else will just be gravy once you take away the production costs, whatever they're making. I think this movie was estimated to be about a couple $100 million.
$100 million, yeah.
Yeah, still, I don't think it'll take long to make their money back, but that's a significant chunk. It was in Disney's best interest to, make a good movie and get a good impression. The bar was set pretty low with episodes 1, 2, and 3. I know I went in, with very low expectations, going, just please don't suck, just please don't suck, and I think they hit it out of the park.
Well, it is. They did have a low bar. That is exactly true, because no one was comparing this to say, please be better than Star Wars A New Hope. No one was doing that. Everyone was saying, make me love Star Wars again. Be better than the prequels. And that was, and anyone who's competent, given the enormous amount of material you have in Star Wars, that should be easy.
Considering there's must be 60, 70 books of the expanded universe, I mean, they could have picked one plot point out and just gone with that. So there's a lot of good writing out there in the Star Wars universe.
My feeling was this is about as good as they could do this kind of transition film. To start a new series. There's flaws in it, but they're relatively minor. You can suspend your disbelief and go with it, and this is just about as good as you can get, as I can imagine them doing. And my feeling was I had a lot of fun, and I didn't go into it really. I hadn't watched any of the trailers, hadn't watched anything, was not really very excited, and was just really surprised how much I enjoyed it. I want to go back and see it again, and now I'm really looking forward to the rest of them. So now my worry now is that's 18 months away. By the time that comes, I'm going to be really excited, and then I could be disappointed, but we'll see.
Well, I certainly, you got to feel pretty confident at this point. I mean, Disney has done a great job with handling the Marvel stuff since they bought that. And I'm not a big comic book guy at all. I'd be more like you, Mark, what you're saying about this. I know nothing about any of the Marvel comic books or the characters or anything like that, but those movies are all fun. And they're nicely tied together, and I look forward to each of them. So I think, theoretically, Star Wars is bigger than anything Marvel related. So,
been around. So, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, you've got. Oh, okay. So we're not spring chickens anymore, but we grew up with Star Wars. I mean, Mark, you were a little later in the scene, but I mean, but it's been part of my life since I was 10 years old. My oldest son, I remember picking him up from school, maybe second, third grade, to go. It's like and tricking him to go when we were going home, and he's like, "Why are we stopping here?" It's like, "Oh yeah, we're going to go see Phantom Menace," and he went. Oh, cool. So, most of his cognitive life he's been doing it. Now my youngest son, he's seen all of the episodes, and now this will be his first new set of movies. So, it's definitely a generational thing.
Yeah, so it should be exciting to see where they take this. You kind of get the feeling it's in good hands at this point. So they're not gonna. You don't want to say that Lucas screwed it up necessarily because he invented it, but you kind of get the impression that he's good at some things and not at others. And
well, my feeling was the sequels, they're the middle movies, whatever they're called. I get all confused. But the prequels, I read two things. One is that Lucas himself admitted they were literally just a money grab. I mean, but the other part was, I think it was based on the original backstory, which was not really that detailed or that important. And they didn't really need to make those movies. They didn't. The story wasn't very deep. It wasn't a good. Wasn't worthy of another trilogy. But they did it anyway because they made a lot of money, and that was kind of why they did that. And this feels quite different because this is Disney behind it, a new company. Like you said, they've got to get that $4 billion back. they're really counting on this as being a revenue driver for the next decade or so, and they've got to do it right. If they screw it up, Well,
and I think they understand what made Star Wars. They get people working on it now that understand why people love Star Wars so much. Whereas it would appear Lucas never really got that. He kind of came up with Star Wars, was a huge hit, and he probably never really understood why it was. And he didn't direct Empire or Return of the Jedi, and he had a lot of help making those, which probably helped them stay on track.
My impression when I was watching this was that it felt like the biggest part of his vision was all the special effects. Like, that's really what George Lucas liked. Was not the story was just a fun little B-movie story of these adventures, kind of based on the old Flash Gordon and stuff like that from the 50s. But it was what intrigued him was the world that he created, and all these the little robots and all the different creatures and the different planets and the sets, and that's really and that's really one of the best things about the series is the world that he created is so rich, and I love that in this one. It felt like that. But
that might be a good point, Mark, in that the first movies have such a simple plot structure that he didn't have to come up with a lot of that. So he, the inventive parts, the parts he invented were, the things to include in that story. Whereas with the prequels, he kind of had to invent all that stuff. He wasn't stealing necessarily a very simple plot structure. And maybe that, without the help, didn't work as well. But we don't need to discuss what went wrong with the prequels. I think the internet has. But
it is interesting to compare that with this, and I think this one is they're clearly, it's hard to tell where they're going with until we see that second one. But I think they're going in a different direction with a more, the story is going to be the focus. And it's still
certainly in my, now that I'm spoiler free, I've been scouring the internet looking for things to read and people's perceptions and stuff. And I mean, by and large, people seem incredibly pleased with this. You're not reading people going to, oh my God, this was a giant mess.
I read
of a movie.
Comments on Internet Movie Database where, you look at the user comments and it's getting very high ratings, like 8.5 out of 10, for most.
Well, certainly, I mean, there's a little bit of a euphoria, a high right now.
Yeah.
You'd want to see after a more period of time, after people have seen it multiple times. I mean, I myself am going to see it again tomorrow. I probably will see it a couple more times. My son probably going to want to go see it on IMAX, and then I'll probably catch it with my dad. So I'll probably see it 4 times in the next couple of weeks.
I think most of the negative comments seem to be centered on how the plot is so, it steals so much from A New Hope and all that. And, that kind of stuff bothered me a little bit, but at the same time, it was like, this one didn't need to have an original plot. That's not its purpose. Its purpose is to be this bridge movie, like we said. So it did what it needed to do really well. It didn't ruin anything. It wasn't tremendously innovative, but it didn't need to be. It set up some great new characters, and now we're excited about the future, and that's really the main goal that Disney needed to do, and they hit it out of the park.
Well, the best thing about this movie is it answered 0 questions. So here we are, we're a week later, and not even a week later, and we've come up with a dozen major questions like, well, who's Rey? Who's Kylo Ren? I mean, we know so little about either one of them. We don't know much about Finn either, because there's a question of was he captured, taken from his family early on? If so, what was his family? I mean, there's a whole bunch of questions and all the characters, and even the Maz character. It's like, well, that she kind of came out of left field, and there's some story with her. So how did she get the lightsaber?
Right. Well, Finn, they mentioned that he said he was stolen when he was a young kid, but there is that question about how come he was supposedly, they talked about him being conditioned and brainwashed, to be a stormtrooper, but for some reason it didn't kick in. It didn't work. It didn't take, and all the other stormtroopers it took. So what's special about him that made it not take?
Yeah.
Maybe there's something in his background that.
I'm really hoping he's not Mace Windu's kid, really.
I have not even considered that. Yeah, that would be weird. That would be strange just because most people are going to be like, Mace who? I mean, I don't know that he's a well-known enough character.
Well, but... or he's the guy on the mining station. Name
Lando?
Yeah, Lando's kid. I mean, I kind of hope not.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't make much sense. I mean, Lando was just a regular dude. But... Yeah, I agree. They've left lots of things that are open, and they'll give people things to discuss for the next year and a half.
Ad nauseum.
And it'll give them a great tagline for the next movie, you know, like you said, what is Ren? Or who is Ren? I mean, who is Ren? And, I mean, because even some of the trailers, the wording in them, and then granted they use words from other movies, but that one of the trailers where Luke says, you know, the Force is strong in my family. My father had it, I have it, my sister has it, and now you have it. And it's strongly implied they're talking about Rey when that's said, but that's not mentioned in the movie specifically. Yeah. And it's just like, well, that would imply that Rey is part of the Star Wars lineage. But even if you knew that was 100% true, you don't know if that means she's Kylo Ren's sister, or if, you know, Luke had a daughter directly. You don't know this.
In the expanded universe, he did.
Right. In the expanded universe, he did. And because, you know, we know nothing about Luke, you know, we don't know if he had a wife. I mean, in the prequels, they make it clear that that's generally frowned upon, but then Anakin takes on a wife. And then, you know, and it's not like there's a Jedi Order anymore. So, you know, why would he have to follow such a crazy rule anyway?
Well, exactly. And because there's precedent with his father, I could go there.
Right. So, and if that were the case, I think I'd be okay with that. It seems... I've seen another theory in a couple places now where people are saying that maybe it's she is Han Solo's sister, but one that not Han Solo's sister, Kylo Ren's sister, so Han Solo's daughter, but Han Solo didn't know about her.
So not with Leia.
So it was a time frame that, you know, she was born after a split because Kylo Ren did this bad thing. So Han doesn't know about it. It doesn't seem to me like the characters are far apart enough in age for that to really work. But, you know, in the prequels, there was a big gap in age that also didn't seem like it really worked either. So.
Yeah, there is that.
So who knows? It's fun fodder to talk and argue and ponder. So that'll be exciting. All right, well, this has gone on for longer than I think any of us expected. So we probably should... wrap this up. So overall, I'm going to have to say, you know, thumbs up. As I mentioned, I'm going to be seeing it a bunch of times. Bob and Mark also seem to be indicating thumbs up. I want to thank Bob of Bikini Software, who was a podcast guest a long time ago. I have to get you on again. It's been a while.
I think I was your very first podcast guest.
I think you were, yeah. And Mark, who was a guest maybe about a year or so ago, who's also probably due to return. Mark, of course, runs the XDev magazine that's been publishing about Xojo for, 15 years now? It's a really long time.
14th year, January.
Yeah, so that's great. And so I want to thank you guys for being on this special Xojo Talk about Star Wars The Force Awakens. Have a Happy New Year, everybody.